So when we were at Kavita's house, and Asha was talking there, we joked a little bit about how, we think we're doing really good being all kind of focused and passionate about something, but it may not really be giving us the solution we want, so this is a song about that. Brother, I've a faint suspicion you and I've been led astray, taught to drive the devil from us. We've invited him to stay. What we need, clap along, is light, for we can't drive out the darkness with a stick. With a stick, no, we can't drive out the devil with a stick. Some proclaim all men are sinners, can't escape the devil's might. How their interest must intrigue him, they won't let him out of sight. What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness. Talking sin, no, we can't drive out the devil talking sin. Some of us were taught the slogan, social evils must be slain. But can anger drive out sorrow? How can passion conquer pain? What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness. While we hate, no, we can't drive out the devil while we hate. Brother, have you ever wondered why the darkness lingers on? If we want to see the sunrise, let us turn and face the dawn. What we need is light, for we'll only best the darkness when we love, yes, we'll only best the devil when we love. This is a song we wanted to sing just because it reminds us of New Zealand. What was the other one? Oh. Let's do this one. It's called Emerald Isle. Could be about Ireland, could be about New Zealand. Come here while I sing you of emerald hills, of valleys and meadows so fair, that all who have seen them have carried away memories in their hearts, friends, like the lilacs of May. Oh, my song is the story of the lilacs of May. My song is the story of deer on the hills, of larks that soar seeking the sun, of nightingales lifting the curtain of night, as with music they bring down heaven's blessing of light. Oh, my song is the story of God's blessing of light. Come join me in singing of that emerald isle, of flowers that like jewels besprinkle the lea, of waterfalls eager to embrace the wide sea, as we with our Maker united would be, as we with our Maker reunited would be. Come here while I sing you of emerald hills, of valleys and meadows so fair, that all who have seen them have carried away memories in their hearts, friends, like the lilacs of May. Oh, my song is the story of the lilacs of May. And we're going to finish here with a song called The Secret of Laughter. What is the secret of laughter? Well, we're going to tell you. And you're going to join us in chorus, which goes, what's the key there? Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Do it again. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. The secret of laughter lies in the laughing, not in the search for joy. It's a swallow winging on the wind, its innocence in a boy. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Joy in the singing, not in the song sung, welcome but never crave. You could, if you think that laughter lies in things, to things you'll be but a slave. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Joy in the giving, not in the gaining. Grasp and you'll never sing. You could win the world and still be poor. Win peace and live like a king. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Sing when the sun shines, sing when the rain falls, sing when your road seems strange. In a tempest seize the lightning flash and ride the winds of change. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. One more time. Lura, lura, lero, lura, lura, lie. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Great. And let's chant a little bit. Thou art my love, thou art my love, thou
Let's meditate now for a few minutes. I want to take us through a visualization that is part of what we've been talking about this whole time. So first, just for a short time here, let's settle down watching the breath, as we've taught you several times now. On the inflow of the breath, chant the mantra Hong. On the outflow of the breath, chant the mantra Sa. And just settle in for a short time here. As deeply as possible, letting your consciousness be absorbed only by the in and the outflow of the breath. Now imagine or consider, even as you are inhaling and letting the breath out, quietly thinking Hong, Sa. Everyone else in the room is also following exactly the same pattern. Each one of us allowing the breath to flow in, allowing the breath to flow out. And even though we are utterly still and not looking or touching one another, even as we follow the breath and affirm, I am spirit. So everyone else with whom we are sharing this space and this experience, each one exactly as you is that same spirit. I am spirit. And now as we watch the breath for a few moments in silence, feel that you are perceiving and experiencing not only the spirit within yourself, but that same spirit in everyone around you. Now in imagination and visualization, feel that some part of your spirit now is expanding beyond your body, rising up and out through the spiritual eye, and floating in a sense above us, so that now we are not only watching the breath flow in and out of our own body, but from this higher perspective we can see the beam of light that is all the other people, each one an individual beam. And we watch that breath flow and see how that breath is also a pulsing beam of light. And together we float above our little bodies. And with great benevolence and respect and appreciation, we float in that light and watch that light reaching downward to each of our bodies, and that light animating the force, breath flowing in and out. I am Spirit, Hong, Sa. Now practice watching your breath from above yourself. Feeling the power of Spirit animating you. Now feel that power of Spirit liberating us from the confines of this room, spreading outward in all directions, liberating us from the confines of our body, so that we're no longer watching physical breath, but are simply moving on the wave of light, with the simple thought, I am Spirit. All those little concerns, responsibilities, realities that have to be faced for the moment now, all gone. I am Spirit. And all those with whom we are sharing this experience are all floating free, like a bunch of helium balloons suddenly released. How high can we go? How far can we expand? How joyously free can we become? I am Spirit. I am Spirit. Now, just as helium balloons gradually lose their buoyancy, very gently and very sweetly, still affirming, I am spirit. Our freedom in that free spirit, we begin to come back. And we float gently down, back into this room, now closer together again. And then gradually, with a gentle sigh, that free balloon of our spirit settles back into our physical bodies. Same mantra, I am spirit, living now again in my body, but I am spirit. Find the breath now. And feel, though, that that breath is the link to great expanse of freedom. Calm as the breath flows in, so as the breath flows out, not binding us, but animating us with that power of spirit. Now imagine for a moment the consciousness of a fully liberated being, one who can freely move like a released balloon into the infinite sky, and just as freely animate and inhabit the body, live in the breath, live outside of the breath. Imagine what it would be like to be that free, to be absolutely without fear, absolutely without concern, absolutely certain that all that happens is the will of God, and the will of God is Sat Chit Ananda. Everything is moving toward bliss. Now when you have this, even the littlest bit of this feeling, open your eyes and look at the pictures on the altar. Especially look into the eyes of those that you can see. Try to imagine what it would be like to be that free. Try to draw into yourself the vibration you see in those eyes, so that some part of that freedom can become yours. And now very slowly, just look around the room and look at all the people who are sharing this with you, and realizing that every aspiration of your heart, every feeling of your life experience, as it is for you, so it is for everyone. And what does that do for your relationships and your friendships and your trust with one another? So let us close our eyes again. And I want to chant Om. And as we put our voices together in chanting Om, and as we raise our hands, Feel that we are uniting our hearts and spirits and sending out from this place an awareness of the power of spirit in our lives and a desire to share that with all. Okay. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts about what we just did? There it is. Anybody wish to share anything? Yes, Matthew.
Yeah, I just noticed how hard and fast I've obviously identified with just being physical, even though I've thought about spiritual for the last 10, 11 years. Just showing you how indoctrinated and strong the unconscious perception of being just a physical body and person.
Yeah, that's a good observation. You know, you made yourself also a strong man, so it's even stronger. Yeah, very good to notice. Any other comments? Did anyone feel anything when you looked at the altar? Did anybody speak to you, or did you have a perception? Yeah. Yes?
I'm trying to read the path of,
Kriyananda? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thanks. Uh-huh. Say again?
I felt his presence.
Very good.
Jesus is often stood out.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's important to realize that there are faces here because they inhabited bodies, but there's no egoic personalities, and therefore they're not competing with each other. It's like the different panes of the window, and when you look through the different panes, you're looking out into the same vista, even though you look through different panes of the window. So it's you can look in any direction and you're still going through the window to the same infinity. Yeah. Anything else? Huh. All right. I wanted to talk just a little bit, and I'm going to start on a more practical level, and then we'll see where we go from there. I need to just bring something closer to me, a simple solution. To hike away every time I have to put this down. The most important, there's several, I won't say most. If you want to be a person who meditates, you have to begin to think of yourself as a person who meditates. Or as a person who thinks spiritual thoughts or behaves in a spiritual way. We try to make our meditation practice precise and regular. Meditating, and they're very obvious and practical things. If you do something at the same time every day and in the same way, it becomes a habit. Everyone gets up in the morning and showers and brushes their teeth, and you don't even think about it because it's your habit to do so. If you develop that, you have a routine that includes meditation, it becomes easier to do it because it's just part of what you do. But another way to think about it is to think of yourself, and this is wordsmithing, but I really enjoy it. Think of your person who meditates regularly. And maybe that regularly is once a month, or once a week, or comes regularly, like Kavita has a Wednesday night meditation at her house. And so instead of thinking that the only way that you can be a regular meditator is that I meditate every morning and every night like this, just make meditation a regular part of your life. And set up certain helpful reality, such as the fact that she has that regular meditation, is precisely for this reason, so that you'll be a person who meditates regularly, or every Sunday morning, or whatever it might be. But always think in terms of a very long rhythm. Don't measure yourself in terms of what you did yesterday or the day before, but just look at the whole course of your life and try to set up certain minimum patterns that you will maintain. And you'll find that it really becomes part of your self-definition. And you don't want to get a self-definition as a person who tried to meditate and wasn't successful. You want to have a self-definition that says, I'm doing this. This is what I do, even if it's only in this way or that way. Another thing about why people, and it's very helpful in all of that, to have a place in your house, obviously, where you meditate, because places assume the vibration of what happens there. And if you sit in the same chair that you watch television or work at your computer and then suddenly try to meditate in it, the dominant vibration is going to affect you. So if your house is set up in such a way that you can actually give yourself a place where you only meditate. When I first started meditating, I was living in a very casual way, and my bed was just a pad on the floor, and it was in the corner. But what I did is I pulled the bed out about 2 feet, the mat out about 2 feet, and right in that little 2-foot section, I put a meditation cushion and some symbols that were meaningful to me of my meditation practice. And so when I meditated, I sat on that side of the bed. When I got up in the morning, I got up on the other side. And it was, it was just 2 square feet, but it was 2 square feet that was dedicated to this practice. And if you don't want to make it obtrusive in your house, you can have it in a box and just close it up and then open it up. And it's very helpful also to have things in front of you that remind you of what you're doing. Now, if you're inclined toward images of saintly people, that's certainly helpful because their eyes carry the vibration. But if a seashell or a leaf or a peacock feather, whatever it might be, whatever it is so that it reminds you, we need all the help we can get. And you need to be very creative in your meditation. There are countless things you can do to support your meditation. You can pray for others, you can do affirmations, you can chant, you can have guided meditations, and you can find recordings from Ananda or from other places of everything that you enjoy. And instead of saying, this is what I'm supposed to do, say rather, this is what I will do. Because whatever works for you is the best possible meditation practice for you, and that's an important thing to realize. The other thing is, you need to constantly be refreshing yourself in a spiritual way. Spirituality is not static. It's an ever-expanding, ever-growing reality, and I've observed, because I've lived in community for a long time and also been in the front of teaching people how to do this, that if a person begins to think, now I've got it and I'll do it, meditation is a peculiar practice because it's entirely solitary. I mean, you're alone inside yourself. But the more you meditate with other people and the more you are in spiritual company, the easier it is to do it by yourself. And most people, if they isolate themselves in their practice, only very few people have enough actual inner strength to be able to maintain and advance without refreshing and strengthening their energy from the outside. When Yogananda came to America, one of his primary missions in coming was the founding of spiritual communities. Communities that were not just for monks and nuns, but were people from all walks of life, where people could live a dedicated spiritual life in the company of other truth seekers. When you watch the movie Finding Happiness or whatever else that you do, you'll really see how those Ananda communities have worked. And I live in a community, but we also have a teaching center and we provide people lots of opportunities. You're very fortunate here because Kavita's running her center, which is the only place in New Zealand right now where we have any kind of focused energy. But if you don't continue to renew your energy, almost always your energy begins to wane. Now you can renew it in person, you can renew it online. There's just enormous numbers of things. But you have to say to yourself, don't think, I can just take this away and then do it. Because watch yourself. You have to be honest enough to realize that the inspiration of a day spent together, in 4 days it's not so bright, and in 4 months you can hardly remember. But if
on a regular basis. You know, whether you sign on, as I say, for an online course. They even have started doing this peculiar thing, which is group meditation over the internet, which I myself thought was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard of. I have to admit it. There's a camera, and it's focused on the altar, and it's focused on a few people doing absolutely nothing. You think, what is this? But real time bridges all distance. And so I actually have found when you're meditating in California with people who are meditating in Italy and in India, and you're all meditating at the same time, I'll be darned if it's not a real experience. And it's really, and you'll hear them chant and pray and all of that too. But it's amazing, which is to say, it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, you can find a way. And part of what makes meditation successful is the humility to realize I need help. And that was what I was saying earlier to all those who received him. St. John said, why didn't people receive Jesus? You would think everybody would have received Jesus. Why not? Especially what we know now. Of course, then you had to intuit it. It wasn't the Bible wasn't written, and the church hadn't told you what the truth was. You had to be able to intuit it. But one thing is, as I was saying earlier, you have to have the humility to realize I need help. And the more humble we can be and the more help we can seek, the more powerful we'll become. So if you watch your energy waning, ask yourself, what am I doing to renew it? And it's a very odd thing, you see, because the vibration for spiritual aspiration is very, very subtle. The vibration for ice cream and pizza and movies is very unsubtle. I want it, I get it. And then you're hungry again, and then you do it again. It's just like there's no question about what you want. When you're feeling this call to this more subtle level, when you're not in touch with it, you forget even that it's there. And you also forget why you wanted it. And this is, Yogananda has a book, it's called Whispers from Eternity. And when people asked him, you know, what will happen after you die? He said, read my whispers from eternity. I always wished he'd called that, you know, shouts from eternity or screaming from eternity. But it was a whisper because the very nature of the spiritual life is very subtle and it's hard to touch. And so if you move too far away from it, you actually forget that it's there. And this is something I've watched because I've been, as I said, in community for 45 years. Which, you know, sounds like such a big number. It really is a little number to me. I mean, because it's always now, remember? So it's just now. It's not all accumulated back there. But what that has allowed me to do is I've watched lots of people. I've watched people be very enthusiastic, then become convinced that they can manage without any help, and then they move away from it, and then they can't remember. And it's interesting because several of you have told me that many years ago, Yogananda came into your life. And then all these years later, now all of a sudden he's back in your life. I mean, that's of specific interest because that's the lineage, of course, I represent. But it's also just an interesting fact, isn't it? That it comes in and it's like a wave. It tries to pull you, and then maybe it's not the right moment, or maybe the tide comes in slowly. You know, the tide doesn't come in all at once. It's not low tide and then bingo, it's high tide like that. There's just a lot of different waves that have to keep coming before it reaches the top. And sometimes in our own lives, there's a moment where we're lifted, whatever that is. I'm speaking of reading Autobiography of a Yogi or something like that, but it can be many things. And others of you have told me different stories, childhood memories, just knowing something when you were small, and then having it taken away from you. But then you find it again. Swami Kriyananda, because he was such an unusual person, when he was a child, he said he lived more in the astral world than in this world. As he described it, his all-pervasive feeling about his early childhood was astonishment to be in this world at all. That's how he put it. And he said he lived far more in the astral world than in this world. He just was only half on this planet, really until about the age of 9. And then he decided he needed to relate more to this world. But when he was young, he used to go to sleep he would lie in bed at night, and he said this great light would appear in front of him, and he would stare into that beautiful light, and then gradually it would absorb him, and he would go to sleep, or whatever he went into. He really went into a superconscious state. He said he thought that's what everybody did when they went to sleep. It never crossed his mind that that wasn't just what people did. Everybody lays down and closes their eyes, and since that's what happened to him, it was a long time before he found out that that wasn't what other people were doing. But when he became 9, what happened was he became ill. He went into a feverish delirium. He said he became a little bit wary of altered states. What also happened to him is that he began to see how different he was from everyone around him, and he felt this need to try to conform to their reality. I mean, I'm sure all of us can understand that, to try to conform to a reality that everybody seems to take for granted, and it isn't mine, but you feel like you're the one who's wrong. So he went through those middle years, and then when he was 22, he met Yogananda, and he was initiated into Kriya Yoga meditation. And he said in the end, he went very deep into the meditation, and he said he went back into that light. But here's what he said that was so interesting. He said when he went back into that light, no time had passed. It was exactly the same moment and the same reality that he had gone into many times when he was a child. He just moved from the ephemeral back into the eternal. But all that time in between, he was just living on the surface, so he wasn't there. But then as soon as the door opened, he just went right back into it. So what happens to us is we touch it. You know, whether we go as deeply as he did or not, but we touch it. And that really what happens is just this soul hunger starts, however that feels to you. But if you ignore it, I've always been very health conscious. I'm very healthy as a rule, and my body works very well, and I'm very grateful for that. But I've been very conscientious about health and care and diet and water and exercise, everything since before I was 20. And it occurred to me one day, oh, you probably had a lot of bad health in previous lives. And so you, from a very early age, I knew that this is not something you can take for granted. I had to be really attentive to that. And I remember when I first learned the importance of hydration. But there was an interesting fact that I read in this book that I never forgot. If you ignore your natural thirst long enough, you cease being thirsty. And so to teach you to be properly hydrated, you had to force yourself to drink water for a while until you got where your natural thirst would guide you again. Well, I've thought about that so many times in the spiritual way. We have a natural thirst, and I was talking about education in the last couple of days. Children instinctively know that they're connected to a greater reality, and children have that remarkable happiness. You know, they're just happy about everything. They are a little dumb, that's part of the reason, but they're also just happy. And then we gradually lose our connection with that. Well, because things happen to us, because things challenge that happiness. And we allow those challenges to take us away from that happiness, whether it's the challenge of difficult circumstances or the challenge of other people's not understanding. When I was a very small child, my mother scolded me, and I got my feelings hurt. And I remember consciously curling up and going deeper into myself. Even as a little child, that's how I thought about it. Because I knew there was a place inside of me that if I could find it, that the hurt wouldn't touch me anymore. And I'm not talking about dissociating, which is a psychologically unhealthy thing to do. It was exactly what I was doing with us here. I just got bigger and bigger. And I knew if I got big enough like that it would still be, the little one who'd had her feelings hurt would still be there. But from this perspective, it wouldn't be the same. Right? And now we know that intuitively. But if we ignore that natural call to expanded awareness, then we're no longer thirsty anymore. That's why we have to keep feeding it. That's why we have to keep coming back to it. Whether it's with daily meditation, with prayer, with spiritual reading, with good company, just hanging out with other people who will agree with you, who will support you in this. People are so non-supportive of the spiritual life. It's very important that you be with people as much as you can. And that's where the internet is actually terrific, because you can keep the company of very spiritual people, even spiritual people who aren't on the planet anymore. You can hang out with them and just keep reminding you. I mean, I watch it in myself. My vibration gets a little rough, and I'll pick up one of Swamiji's books and I just won't want to read it, and I'll read a novel instead, But then another time you go over and you pick it up and all of a sudden you're right there. And I also know if I keep with it, it'll change me. I put on a record and so on like that. Just because you're not hungry, that doesn't mean that you're not starving. And you have to objectify all of this. You can't just go by what you feel. This is the battle. You have to make the conscious decision that this is what I'm going to do, and that's what I've been talking about a lot. All right. Do we have any questions? If not, we'll take a little bit of a break and then we'll come back for our last session. Any comments or thoughts? Then let's wander out into the other room and refurbish ourselves with coffee and tea, and then we'll come back for the end. And there's a book called How to Be Happy All the Time. About half that book is about money. It's actually really interesting. Yeah, because it just is a huge issue in everyone's life that has to be sorted out. It's not at all outside of it. That's why I'll speak to it this way. All right. May I have your attention, please, for approximately another half hour, and then you are free to do whatever you want. Today is the holiday Monday. I arrived here on Friday. This is our first weekend. We're having another weekend, just 2 days, next weekend, because it's not a 3-day weekend. And the subject is generally, we built this kind of a progressive program on many aspects of meditation. Don't feel, every program is geared to the people who are in the room, so you don't have to worry if the topic seems to fit you or not. It will. So if you would like to come back we'll spend another day in this room next Saturday, very similar to what we've been doing. There seems to be a progression of our friendships and our relationships, which are changing everything, which is very nice, which is exactly what we hoped would happen. And during this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Or Tuesday, Wednesday?
Tuesday, Wednesday.
Tuesday, Wednesday. Tuesday we're back where we were for lunch at Kavita's home, the Narrows retreat. It's just a Q&A. We're just going to be sitting around essentially like we were on the floor. It's a free program, and we'll just be chatting, and it's a Ask Asha evening based on the name of the book. It's an evening, 7 o'clock. Wednesday we're back in here, and there's some topic, which is something or another.
Progress in meditation, what does it look like?
Okay. So there's a topic.
Asha will talk on that subject.
But we really don't know. I know even less than you do what she's going to say. So we'll be back in here. Thursday, where are we? Are we back here on Thursday?
So Thursday
No.
is my usual yoga class.
That's it. Kavita's yoga class. And Friday, do we do anything?
No.
Okay, Thursday and Friday are off, but Tuesday and Wednesday, if you'd like to spend an evening, 7 to 8:30, something like that. Then another weekend, then the following week is a similar schedule, and the third weekend we go to Lake Taupo. And if any of you can join us, we would be just delighted if you could come. If money is an obstacle, we have a generous scholarship policy. Because we were at Lake Taupo last 6 months ago, and it was a really marvelous weekend there. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what a beautiful spot it is. But just really everybody being away in such a nice spot, we had a marvelous time. And then we go back to America. This is a 3-week instead of a 6-week trip. So if you can possibly join any or all of this, we would be really happy to have you. And we're much more interested in your presence than your money. So if that's an obstacle, please speak to us about it. Okay? I was asked a question during the break that was a very complicated question about, well, the question has to do with money, in fact, about finances and the pressure of life and the difficulties that we get ourselves into. And, this is, the world economies are not quite as robust as they used to be. I don't really know what this country is doing, but all over the planet things are not quite it's not quite so easy to just make your way. And certainly where I live in a bubble of Silicon Valley where things are still booming a bit, but all around us it's really difficult. And this seems to be the times we're moving into. We have all enjoyed a period of unprecedented wealth, comfort, and prosperity. You know, where everybody has their own home and their own everything, and just the way we've been, and we've all grown accustomed to it. Whether it will continue or not, I can't say. There's certainly a lot of signs that we're going to all have to readjust our expectations. But that's a different, slightly different subject. The essence of the question I was asked is, what do you do when it just, everything seems so difficult and you really cannot see the way out? There was a, let me just give this. When we start understanding that this is an energy universe, and this is something I've mentioned several different times, there's a cartoon that I saw in the New Yorker, it was from some years ago, at the time when Einstein's revelations about the energy nature of the universe were just beginning to happen. And it was a picture of a New York street. And you saw all these different people. You saw a mother who was tending her babe, and she's looking up thoughtfully, and the street cleaner is leaning on his broom like this, and the taxi driver is parked sort of staring up. And then there's this quote from Einstein. It says, mankind must gradually accustom himself to an energy concept of the universe. So you see all these ordinary citizens trying to get comfortable with an energy concept of the universe, meaning that the laws are a little bit different than we think they are. It isn't really just about pushing this object against that object. What's really happening is it's all energy, and energy responds to magnetism. And the power of magnetism is, to a very large extent, our thoughts and our attitudes and our faith in a greater reality, and not our foolish optimism, but our positive expectation that there's always going to be a solution. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always going to get what we want. In the Ask Asha book, someone asked me the question, I'm in love with this man, but he's not in love with me. Essentially the question was, how can I make him love me? And I think she wanted the right affirmation. I said, I'm sorry, honey, if he doesn't, he's not going to. He's had every chance in the world, and it looks like he's not interested. I wish I could tell you, pray hard enough, and you will get the result you want. But I'm not telling you the truth if I tell you that. You know, many, many, many times in our incarnations, our karma is that it's not going to work out externally. But what we make of it is something else. Now, I'm not going to start there by saying just accept that everything is a disaster. That's not really where I'm going. What I'm saying is that we affect things much more than we realize by the attitude and the energy that we put out. I use the word dharma which is now almost an English word. And dharma means, sometimes people translate that in English as duty, but that's not nearly good enough. Dharma is that action which expands your own consciousness and moves you toward a greater reality. And the most important thing in life is to behave in a way that is dharma, that is the consciousness expanding action for you. And sometimes there's no logical connection between the result we're trying to get and dharma. You know, that everything looks like I need to do this or I need to do that. There's a principle of Ananda that we've always followed. Where there is dharma, there is always victory. That doesn't say where there is dharma, there is always lots of success in the eyes of the world, but there is always victory. What is victory? Victory is to expand our consciousness, to live correctly and move toward the light. There's power in dharma, in other words. And sometimes I myself have been in the position and have had to advise other people. Sometimes you have to do your dharma in what I say is a vacuum, which is you don't really know where it's going to take you or how it's going to work, but you just step by step behave as well as you can. And you really can't do more than that, because we do not always know what our karma is. We do not always know what is really in our best interests. We know what we prefer, We know what we want, but we don't always know what's in our best interest. These are related to a lot of other things that I've said earlier. So the most important thing you have to keep track of, and it's a serious challenge, is that you have to always try to make sure that you can have the best possible magnetism that you can have. Worry certainly doesn't increase our magnetism and doesn't affect anything. To be discouraged, to be afraid, does not help our magnetism. And sometimes every reason, every external reason is going to make you worried and afraid. And this is where we have to have, this is the benefit of meditation and a spiritual practice, is that no matter what it looks like, if it doesn't have a happy ending, I'm not at the ending yet. No matter what the interim stage is like, we just have to be able to keep going. And there's another factor here, which is a little too late if you're already in trouble. Many years ago, I had this conundrum in my mind because of having been raised in a Jewish family and being born in 1947. I always had these pictures of concentration camps in my mind. And I had this habit, which I finally almost gotten over, that I used to like to read stories of people in very extreme circumstances, true stories. So I would always be reading about people who were imprisoned, who were climbing mountains, who were lost in the wilderness, who were put into concentration camps, and just see how people cope. I think I had a great fear of these things, and I just needed to reinforce in my mind that you can cope. But I used to have an actual very specific worry. Did I die in this circumstance? I don't know. My specific worry is I'm in a concentration camp and I'm in the count. You know, the line, you've all seen the movies too. You're lined up there and you're being counted. And then somebody next to me is brutalized. Do I throw myself into that, even perhaps allowing myself to be killed, or do I just stand there and let it happen right next to me? And what am I supposed to do? Weird problem, but it was a real problem in my mind. Finally, one day, I realized that I could ask Swami Kriyananda. I finally met someone I could ask. And the opportunity came, and I explained the whole thing to him. His answer, in his way, he just goes right way out of the box, just totally out of the box. Because it was, for me, it was like, this might be suicidal. Is it wrong to commit suicide in such a moment? And he said, what you're actually asking is, what is God's will in that moment? Because that's what God's will in this sense. What is my dharma? What is the right action for me? Is it, maybe if I interfere, it's going to cause trouble for everyone? You know, maybe my whole incarnation was about having the courage to sacrifice myself at this moment, because it could be just to be willing to die in order to stand up for what I believe. How do you know? And he said, his answer to me was, you have to practice when it's easier. Because in a moment of crisis, the only way you're going to be able instinctively to know is that you have been practicing all the time before that. In every situation, you're asking, what is dharma here? What is right action? What is being asked of me? What should I do? And then if that habit is instilled, even when the stakes are very high, you'll just be able to know. And so practice when it's easier has been for me one of the very important mantras of my life, realizing that no interaction is unimportant, because all of them are setting the habit in my mind of how am I going to respond. Do I think first, what's in it for me, Charlotte? Or do I think first, how can I serve? And not merely serve others, but how can I serve God? How can I serve my own consciousness? How can I serve the cause, my own soul's cause? And you realize at all times, and I don't mean you become really weird about it, should I put cream in my coffee or not? What do you want, God? Cream, no cream? You know, people ask God questions for which God doesn't really care. And you get yourself really mixed up because you're expecting the divine to have an opinion about something that has nothing to do with Dharma. It's just your preferences. So you don't want to really become weird, but there are many issues where it really is a question of how can I love, how can I give, how can I serve, How can I remind others of the divine in this moment? And you don't have to be talking about God all the time. They don't have to know what you're doing. You just have genuine compassion, genuine kindness, genuine honor, but you're always focused on that reality. And then when the stakes are higher, you're already used to doing it. So especially when you find yourself in a very difficult situation, you have to be very, very attentive to all aspects of Dharma, which above all, and especially when your situation looks impossible, because many situations are, you have to be very careful about your magnetism. And that's where I was saying, you have to be positive, you have to keep faith with the people who, insofar as you can, you have to trust that if you are not able to fulfill your obligations, that God has a plan, that it's not all up to you. It's not Dharma to think I am the only force in the universe and everything has to happen, and if I fail, then everything has failed. That's not actual Dharma. That's well-intentioned, but that's ego. You know, does no one else on the planet have karma except me? You know, I'm in charge of everything. That starts out feeling like a responsible action, but then it becomes a very exaggerated sense of your own importance. And when you're trying to make the world behave in a certain way, you're no longer in relationship to God. You're no longer in relationship to a greater reality. So you see, it gets a little subtle. But I want to tell you one other story here, which is very important in relation to this. A woman friend of mine she was having what I lovingly called 100%er, which is every aspect of her life was collapsing. Just everything was collapsing. Money was collapsing, children were in trouble, marriage wasn't doing so great, even health wasn't functioning that well, you know, and the roof leaked, and just everything. I have a friend, I'll just digress for a moment. Because sometimes it happens like this. He had separated from the mother of his son at a fairly early age and had paid child support faithfully all the way through. The child was 18 and he was done. His wife was an unscrupulous person and somehow or another managed to fake up a whole bunch of legal documents and actually got a judgment against him. He didn't even know there was a case saying he'd never paid any of the child support and that he suddenly owed like $350,000 or something like that. Totally false, but a total mess. Okay, also this man at the time had a terminal cancer diagnosis and he was in a lot of trouble, so I called a friend of mine who was a criminal defense attorney, very good attorney, so I called him up and his name was Deck. Deck, you know, my friend, false judgment, you know, I don't know if he'll live long enough for this to matter, but it matters now. He said, okay, have him come in on Thursday, have him bring all his bank records, of course. Oh, I said, I forgot to mention, his house burned down, so he has no records. Deck said, it would, of course it would. You know, just like when you get into these karmic cycles where things begin to roll. And because he was a criminal defense attorney, he'd seen it over and over. Of course his house burned down and he has no records because he's having 100%er. So my woman friend was having 100%er and, you know, it was taking her down. It's very hard to be brave in the face of this. But see, the more depressed she got, the more your radio station is tuned to all the reasons why it's not going to work. And it becomes a really self-perpetuating reality. You can't tune your station to where it's going to work. So I said to her, in the midst of all of this, I said, what gives you joy and lifts your energy? You know, and at first it was like, there was really no answer. And finally she thought for a while and she said, I enjoy riding my bike. I said, ride your bike. Ride your bike as much as you can. Every time you start getting depressed and upset about this, just get on your bike. And I mean, it sounded crazy to me too, but it was the only thing she could do. And Dharma is a big word for riding your bike, but at least when she rode her bike, she remembered that there was another reality. And she rode her bike for a couple of weeks, and then she came back to see me. And she just sort of, you know, almost incredulously, she said, you know, it seems so wacky to me, but I started doing what you said. And then what happened was her magnetism changed and solutions began to occur to her. She changed her radio station and all of a sudden things that she hadn't been able to even imagine before started coming to her. And she still, it was a debacle anyway. But at least she was able to just thread her way through it with this like this. Because we don't know. We don't really know what is trying to happen sometimes. And to be too insistent about this is what must happen often just makes it worse. Because the lessons are complicated, you see. Sometimes we really need to fail. I don't mean to say that like you have to think you're supposed to fail, but it's more important for you to fail than to succeed. But what you want to know for yourself is that you've behaved according to Dharma, you have been courageous in the face of the challenge, and you have done the right thing step by step. And then after that, who's in charge of this planet? You know, how much can we change things? Is that an easy lesson? No, that's a very difficult lesson. And we don't even nowadays, if we're talking money and business and so on, we're not just dealing with individual karma, we're caught in mass karma here too. And the mass karma is whatever this planet's going to do, whatever your country's going to do. And we, it's our karma because we chose to be here, but it's not all individual, so you can't just take personal responsibility. That itself is the error. The ego gets so puffed up that it thinks that I'm in charge of everything. And that's not Dharma. Now that's not easy. And money is a really, Yogananda's book, How to Be Happy All the Time, about half that book is about money. It's actually very interesting because it's such a cutting edge of our ability to function. And sometimes we just have to accept that we're having to go down a path we didn't want to go down. I mean, we've struggled. I've been part of this community for a long time, and we've had a lot of ups and downs with money. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. But it doesn't seem to be given to, it's very few of us it's given to that it's easy. The rest of us have to just always be disciplined and work with that. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but there's a lot of aspects in that, taking it from money. But the main point is, it's an energy universe, and your magnetism is the key. Always. Swami tells this wonderful story about this man who later became a monk at Self-Realization Fellowship. He was a mountain climber. He was a Swiss man, I think, or Yugoslavian. And he climbed a lot of mountains in Europe and made lots of first ascents. He was a very dynamic man. And he saw this mountain, whatever it was, that had often been climbed from one side, and he thought he could climb it from the other. A solo climb, and this was in the 40s, so it wasn't as sophisticated with the equipment. So he climbed almost to the top, and then he found a place where there was no place to go, except in order to go up, he had to go backwards like that, hanging over space, and then over the top. And once he got to there, it wouldn't be hard to get down again, but he couldn't go down the way he'd come up, and he was going to have to hang upside down. And he didn't have the equipment to do that. He was all by himself up there. So he started climbing up, and as soon as he got, too far like this, he fell back down to the ledge before he was able to go out over space. So he did it like this. And he finally said to himself, this was no cell phones, no rescue, he said, well, if I'm going to starve to death up here, I might as well die trying. And he said he did that like 25 times. Each time he just acted as if this time it was going to work, and he got up there and he fell to the ground. And he did it over and over. And then the 26th time, he got to that point, and he said he felt a hand holding him to the mountain. He went out upside down over space, but something held him to the mountain, and he went over the top. And what Swamiji commented about that is, we're being watched by angelic beings, and they're impressed when we have a lot of courage. And so one of the things that we have to understand, we are being watched by angelic beings all the time. The people in the astral world are very, very busy, and they're busy helping us, and they help us a lot. And if we show courage, then we inspire the positive forces of the universe to help us. Because that's what the tests are all about. How much faith, how much courage, how much right action can you put out? How much can I stick to my principles when it's hard? Because it really doesn't mean much to stick to them when everything is easy. I was thinking, realizing recently that to be happy is not the same as to be pleased. And a certain amount of what I've been calling happiness is really not that I was happy, it's just that I was pleased by what was going on around me. What if I'm profoundly not pleased? Can I still find happiness? And think how often life doesn't please us and how vulnerable we are. I mean, not all of you may feel as I do, but I don't find that acceptable. It's too scary to me to be that vulnerable. So you have to practice when it's easier. That's where meditation, again. It's not merely the act of meditating and the experience that you have when you're meditating, but meditation is that commitment to a higher reality. And the regular meditation is your way of saying, and this is why meditation changes you even if you don't understand why. Because meditation is a bit like that man, I'm just going to keep trying. I believe that I am part of a greater reality. I believe that I can experience that, and I'm just going to do it. And you don't meditate for what you're getting, you're just meditating because it's dharma, it's the right thing to do. And you just keep meditating, and the angelic forces notice, and they're really happy that you're trying. And then things work out. And they work out well externally, or they don't, but they work out in your heart, which is what really matters. Okay, any comments or thoughts or questions? We're coming to the end of another day. It's a going, gone moment, so. If there's nothing else that needs to be said or wants to be asked, we may be reaching the end of our story today. Well, I think it's the end of our story. How about another song? Let's end with a little music.
Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw